Hi everyone. So I've been having this thought recently, and actually I've been having this thought for a really long time. And I think I've tried to make a podcast about it a few times, but every time I do, I feel like I can never articulate myself. And I kind of feel like that's the point. And if you don't know what Substack is, I read a lot of Substack. And it's basically articles written by people, but they are often very backed up by science or fact or studies. And my recent, personal dilemma, specifically to do with my podcast, but more to do with I think my podcast kind of speaks to my life in general. So I guess more of an overarching theme of my whole life is I feel like I'm at the moment coming to this conclusion that not everything needs to be backed up by theory. I grew up academically taking very theory-based subjects, a lot of sciences, a lot of social sciences that need evidence to kind of prove your point. And I guess as a result of that, I think I kind of was raised with this idea that an idea cannot stand on its own without proof. And I also have a lot of friends that are very logical, and I'm quite a logical person as well. But a lot of my friends are very logical to the point where it's where's the evidence? Where's the proof? And if I were to say, well, I just feel it, that's never going to be enough. And I've noticed this a lot in terms of me making podcasts recently. I end up not posting something or deleting something or stopping halfway because I feel that I just don't have enough knowledge, source knowledge, And I'm always trying to learn about things. I'm reading this book about quantum physics at the moment, and it's really good. But one thing that I've always really struggled with is applying theory to the context of the argument that I am discussing. And my teachers always used to say this in school and college and uni as well. It was always very much I know you know what you're talking about, but you are not you're not getting your point across properly, theoretically speaking. You're missing the theorists, or you're missing their key principles, or you're missing whatever it is, And it's something that I feel like the more podcasting changes, the scope of podcasting changes, because I'm not coming out here and saying that when I started doing podcasting it wasn't a big thing, because it was obviously podcasting's been a big thing for a very long time. But when I started doing podcasting, it didn't have the stigma it has now. Obviously now there's all that internet discourse around they really give anyone a microphone these days, and I am literally a perfect example to that. Who qualified me to come on the internet and to tell you about anything? Absolutely no one. I'm completely unqualified, and I'm never gonna get on the internet and claim to be qualified or overly educated about things. And I think that's why when I get hate comments or I get people disagree with me, I'm yeah, true girl, so true, because who am I to tell you? Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the maybe given me somewhat of an inferiority complex, that because I really struggle to back my points up with fact, especially because a lot of the time I feel like I'm speaking from personal experience, that my podcast lacks validity, or that what I say doesn't hold as much weight as maybe it should or could. And I guess when I started doing this, I never went into this with the intention of I'm going to have the world's most successful podcast, or I'm going to start doing something that I could potentially want to do for the rest of my life. Like, I never went into it like that. I just started going through things and started talking about it, and that was it, really. And I think, obviously, over time, it moved platform and it's changed structure and, you know, all of those things. And then obviously the landscape of podcasting itself has innately changed. And I've noticed this not just in the podcasting world, but in every form of media and communication, this idea of being selective with your word. You know, you can't just say anything these days. Like, I almost feel this is kind of how I feel, that there is so much chatter, whether it's, you know, text, radio, music, podcast, gossip, work meeting, whatever it is. There is so much communication in every single medium that does it mean anything unless it can be proven true? And I feel like that kind of came across like I was trying to make a really philosophical point, or like a fucking TikTok soundbite. It wasn't. But I almost feel like even the way that I speak on episodes, I listened to some of my old episodes the other day, and I realised like I was so much more free-flowing with the way that I would talk about things. I've always kind of felt, I don't know if anyone knows what channeling is, but I've always kind of felt like that when I podcast, that's my way to channel, and kind of like a way for me to connect with like a deeper part of myself, and my spirit, I guess. And I think I maybe disconnected myself from that because I felt that I had to think about everything I say because I want it to mean something or be something or become something, or I don't know. And it's like this thing of like, we're all so focused on making what we do count because it's so hard to make things matter. I feel like we're in this really weird era culturally where everything matters but also nothing matters all at the same time. Like, you know, everyone's got something to say about what you're doing. It doesn't actually mean anything, you know? And I feel like I'm in this place of like, I want to say these things, and I want to bring these opinions out, and I want to have my voice and be heard, and, you know, like be the first woman in my lineage to be able to be outspoken. You know, I think that's something that maybe a lot of women forget, is that this is the first generation of women that, maybe second, let me say second, that are allowed a voice, you know? And I actually did my dissertation on gossip, and about how spoken word has been used as a protection mechanism throughout history. And I learned a lot about gossip and the foundations of gossip. And gossip was, I think I've spoken about this before, but innately gossip was used as a safety mechanism. We would gossip about animals that were scary, or we would gossip about other tribes that maybe didn't have our backs, or, you know, just chit chat basically. And over time, as these threats diminished, our bodies lost the ability to... The thing with evolution is that it can never keep up with cultural shifts. Like, you know, evolutionarily speaking, I think, I'm not sure. It takes a very long time for changes to occur, right? Obviously, because it's generationally and it's passed down, you know. But cultural shifts happen very, very frequently. So what has happened is that on an evolutionary basis, our bodies still think that gossip is a protection mechanism to keep us safe. So we still do it. But because the cultural reasons to gossip aren't really there anymore, we've kind of just transmuted it into something else, like gossiping about your neighbours, or gossiping about your colleagues, or gossiping about whatever it is. And it's again, like, this is where I guess, like, I find the theory side of things interesting, and I would love to be able to recite you some of my dissertation right now and talk about the theorists and the studies, because they're all in there. I can link my dissertation below if you really want to read it. But I think for me, like, the real world application of that makes it so much easier for me to understand when I feel like I'm being a bit of a bitch. I actually made my New Year's resolution this year to be a lot more considerate of my word, which is ironic because I'm just talking about how I feel like I'm overly censoring myself. And I guess maybe the difference is that this is a platform that goes out to God knows who and who knows what, and I don't want to spread hate, obviously, and I don't want to, I guess, like, this is the thing. I think there's a difference between having an opinion and speaking it as truth, and there's been times that I have in episodes before said things where maybe I can look back and think, okay, my delivery was not good, or, my meaning has been misconstrued, and I can understand that. And again, I think that explains why I kind of take my time more with what I want to say, which I think is a good trait. But I guess, again, it kind of, like I said, like, I've lost that arc of channeling. But then if I kind of translate that into my personal life, I feel like I've been having this really deep self-discovery recently, where I've realised I'm just a massive hypocrite about everything. And I realised, like, if I'm going to come on the internet and say whatever about whatever and, preach, be kind, I don't know. I feel like I don't preach be kind, but I mean, obviously preach be kind, but, like, I don't feel like that's, like, one of the fundamental pillars of, like, my podcast. But I noticed that my self-talk and gossip mindset had become, like, unnecessary, or I was saying things about myself that were just, like, so self-deprecating, and it was feeding into my relationships with others, in the sense that because I'd said these things about myself, I believed that everyone else thought these things about me, and as a result of that, I felt like it was bringing up a lot of insecurities that I guess maybe, like, thought I dealt with, or haven't come up for me in a really long time. I went through something quite recently. Well, actually, I didn't go through something. I almost went through something that brought up. It was like a direct parallel of a situation I went through a few years ago, and the situation was a very dangerous situation I went through a few years ago, and it just completely, obviously, mentally, like, put me back in that position. And I noticed, because a lot of the themes that were brought up at that point in my life, whenever it was, when I was like 20 or 19, 20, I don't know. Sorry, it's really tired. No, I'm really tired. It's really late and I'm really tired. A lot of themes that were brought up around this time were because, like, I was in danger at this point in my life. And a lot of the people in my life at the time just did not care, or were not bothered, you know. I don't know, everyone has shit friends when they're younger. Well, not everyone, but like, I'm sure everyone has had shit friends when they were younger. Do you know what I mean? So it's just one of those situations. Anyway, but it was like really traumatizing for me. And then kind of almost having to like relive a similar situation, you know, you kind of revisit a lot of those themes. And at that time in my life, I was actually podcasting at that time in my life. I was very self-deprecating also, and I feel like I started to slip back into a lot of those same habits and thought patterns. And I think it's very easy to pass blame, you know, when you, I guess, like, don't. It's really hard to explain without like just basically divulging all the information. I'm just like, it's not something that I'm comfortable sharing on the internet. It's kind of like, you know, you go through something, or you almost go through something that reminded you of something else that you went through a very long time ago. It's like, okay, I'm going to do a metaphor here so you understand. Imagine when you were a kid, you got bitten by a spider. And when you got bitten by that spider, it was really, really bad. And everyone was like, you're fine. But you weren't fine. Like, you actually got really ill from being bitten by this spider. And you had to go and get help to heal the spider bite. And then for the rest of forever, well, for the rest of the next few years, you're scared of spiders, but you're like trying really hard to reintegrate yourself into the spider life world, because spiders are everywhere and you have to interact with them all the time. And then there's another spider, and everyone's like, this is a good spider. I feel like this is so obvious, but everyone's like, this is a good spider. And you're like, okay, cool. And then the spider starts to get its fangs out, and you're like, oh, I've seen that before. I don't want to be around that spider because that spider looks like it's going to bite me. And then you're like, oh my God, it almost happened again. And you start going through all of these same, it kind of puts you like physiologically back in the same fight or flight response. So your body is behaving the same, even though you haven't physically been bitten. But then I think it's hard for people because they're like, well, you didn't get bitten, so it's fine. And it would have been fine if you didn't have all this past shit with all this other spider, where everyone was like gaslighting you and telling you that you hadn't been bitten or your bite wasn't that bad. And it's like, you know, you revisit these topics, and it's almost like a cycle, right? And it's just a really shitty experience. And you kind of almost have to like relearn healing, you know? Because I feel like I have friends that have been through things that I've never been through. But they have been through these things multiple times. And I have been through things that my friends have never been through, and I have been through them multiple times. And I am very much a believer that we are presented with cycles in our life, and we will keep experiencing said cycle until we manage to break it. And that can come through a realization or a change of scenery, or like a personal adjustment, or moving, or whatever it is. It's different for everyone, and it's always going to be different. But it's something that I've always found is like, you know, why is it that one of my friends consistently goes through this one struggle where I've never experienced it, and vice versa? And I think it's really interesting how we all have our own individual cycles. Obviously, horrible. And I kind of think this is how trauma bonding happens, because when you meet someone that you share that kind of cycle with, it's like this mutual understanding. Again, I'm not saying anything revolutionary here, but you have this like connection of, I get it, you get it. It's like this unspoken thing, and I feel like when you go through something kind of a bit shit, it's really easy to like overanalyze everything, and everything becomes a bigger deal than it would have normally been. Like, I don't know if this is actually a general thing, or just me specific, but I find typically my tolerance for things is quite high. Just like shit is quite high. But when I go through something like this, it's just, I'm just like feel complete, like back down to base level. Like my tolerance is just like, I do not have one. And it's really not a nice experience. And I feel like that changes my ability to communicate effectively, be gracious, be courteous, have empathy even. And it's not something that I want to come on the internet and say like, oh, I'm struggling to empathize with people at the minute, because that's embarrassing. But I feel like I want to be honest. It's like, I do feel like there are times where, and I don't know if actually, I'm hoping someone will relate to me, but when you're going through something, it can be very hard to empathize with other people, especially when you deem their problems as silly. And this is something that I've really had to like look at within myself, because I've had friends before, even now, where like they'll say something and I'm like, you're being so ungrateful right now, or like you're being selfish, or you're being this, or whatever. And I had a conversation with one of my good friends the other day, because I was like, I feel like you're being really selfish right now. And then we were out late that night, and I was like, oh my God, I'm being such a hypocrite. Like, and I saw it in a way that I hadn't yet seen it. And he was like, I'm so glad that you've come to this realization on your own, because to me it was obvious, but to you it wasn't. But like, he was like, I can see now because you told me how I was being selfish, but you couldn't see how you were equally being selfish. Do you see what I mean? So it's like really hard, I think, to come to these realizations unless you admit to them, and I don't know, I feel like I say we, I'm speaking for the majority here, which I probably shouldn't be doing because I don't know how anyone else chooses to operate. I also think I'm quite lucky in that I have a lot of like-minded friends. But I just find, like I was saying, like my tolerance is so much lower. And then I think in terms of that feeding into my communication, I don't have the bandwidth for philosophical and introspective and mentally stimulating conversations. And it's very easy to fall into the mindset of just chatting shit, which is not something to be proud of. Anyway, so I've set this New Year's resolution of making this list every time I feel like I want to be a bitch, or I feel like I want to say something that isn't necessary or kind, or I just write it down and just date it and time it. And if I still feel that way the same time the next day, then I'll speak about it. But 9 times out of 10 I don't. I literally, one of the first entries, it was such a joke. I read it back like an hour later and I was like, you are such a bitch. It was like, that girl's wearing a cast for attention. I didn't say it out loud, but I feel like I would have been saying it for a bit of a ha-ha. But realistically, that's just not a helpful thing to say, is it? Do you know what I mean? Come on, get a grip, Evie, grow up. Stop being such a bitch. But I've found, obviously, doing this, I think I've been doing this for maybe a week now, week and a half. I'm starting to notice patterns in times where I feel, who I'm around and how my speech changes when I'm around certain people. You know, there are certain times when there are certain people that I don't ever have entries around. And this is the thing, these entries aren't about those people, if that makes sense. But it's like there are certain people that I have noticed being around them, I think more negatively, or I think in a more like bitchy way or whatever. I have more things to write down. And I'm not saying it's causal. Like, I'm not saying these people cause that. It's correlational. It's like I am observing that while I'm around these people, I have a tendency to behave in this way. So it's not about blaming them, but it's just about recognizing, you know, these patterns, which I think is really helpful for me. And I don't know. So if you think that would be a good idea, do it. I actually spoke to my therapist about it, because I've gone back into therapy because I'm like low-key kind of going through it right now. But I spoke to her about it, and she told me that it's actually some kind of therapy tactic that they teach about. I mean, I journal anyway, and I know journaling is like a therapy tactic, but she said there's this, I didn't really understand too much about what she was saying, but she didn't go into it too much, but she just told me that was a tactic that they use as a way for people who struggle to compose themselves, like people that struggle with anger and things like that. They get them to do that. I'm not really an angry person, like not really necessary in that way. But most of the time I read them back and I just laugh and I just think like, wow, you did not need to say that out loud, and I'm so glad you didn't. But I think, you know, kind of looping back around to my original point about self-censoring and feeling like, you know, you need to have purpose behind everything you say. You need to have meaning behind everything you say. I think when I look back in to my like really, really old videos, the ones that aren't even on Spotify, the ones that are on Snapchat, that's how old these videos were. I was never speaking about anything negative. It was all either spiritual related, like divination-based stuff, manifestation, introspection, and kind of gradually over time it became slightly heavier in topic, which I think has reflected the change in me as a person as I've learned more about, you know, society and politics and like the state of the world. I know that sounds really pretentious, but I think I personally feel like I would be doing myself an injustice. And again, this is hard because it's hard to talk about politics when you don't have the facts or the statistics. But I think I would be doing myself an injustice by just coming online and being like, guys, you can manifest your dream reality. Just believe in me. While not mentioning anything about, you know, trans rights or fuck ICE or free Palestine or, I don't know, them banning hormones for, you know, young people that want to transition. Like, I don't know. I feel like it's very hard for me to be positive in a time where there is so much political unrest. And I'm not trying to end this off super politically, but I will touch on it briefly. I sometimes think, you know, maybe it would have been best if I just carried on talking about spirit all the time and talking about deities and witchcraft and all, and again, a lot of these things are deeply, deeply rooted in oppression, specifically female oppression. Witchcraft has been systemically rooted in female oppression for thousands of years. The same goes for astrology. But right now, these aren't the things that people are struggling with in my worldview. I'm sure that is the case somewhere in the world, and I will always be someone that like advocates for that. But yeah, I think I struggle to not say something, you know, and I think that does I guess maybe like innately lead to the vibe of my episodes being slightly more pessimistic or slightly more passionate. I think I remember the first podcast episode that I made, that I remember thinking, this is kind of going in a different direction now, was the female rage one. And I actually received a lot of backlash off of that episode. But I still to this day think it's one of the best episodes I've ever made. And I would also just like to quickly say a quick disclaimer. My views may have changed on some of the things that I've said, and I may have grown since, I've been doing this for like 4 years now. I may have grown since I said some of the things that I said in 2022, 2023, whenever it was. But I still stand by everything I said, because at the time I said those things to the best of the knowledge that I had about that topic, And I always worry that in 10 years someone is going to fucking pull a soundbite out of something that I've said. And it is just going to reflect so terribly on me. But I do stand by, at the time, I have never once said anything with malice or hate in my heart. Actually, apart from maybe one time. And I think we all know what that was about. But there is never a time where I would love in an ideal world to have everything I talk about be positive. I think that would be fantastic. It would be great. And it would be a really great, idyllic world to live in. I feel very much that we reflect our environments. And it's funny I say that, because I live in Australia, which is like, no one gives a fuck about politics here. But I'm very fortunate to have friends that do give a fuck about politics. So it is obviously what we spend a lot of our time talking about. And I think on top of the fact that literally everyone I know right now is absolutely going through it, like not a single person I know right now knows peace. Also, there is so much going on in the world with, ICE and deportation and Reform UK and Trump wanting to invade Greenland and, just immense abuse, Gaza, Sudan, Iran, Congo, like there is so much going on, conflict-wise, that it is so hard. And like, please do not say this as a woe is me. It's absolutely never, ever, ever, ever that way. Like, I am literally the luckiest person alive. But it is so hard to come on a platform and talk about these things, talk about like my journey moving down under, like without realizing like my own privilege. And I just squirm talking about this because I don't have the facts. And I don't think, my therapist always says this thing to me. She always says, like ingrained in my head, she's like, you can't judge a situation unless you know it. And to know it, you have to be it inside and out. She says it's about people, about places, about situations, about objects, about jobs, anything. And so it's like in every one of these situations, I am never, ever going to have a full unified worldview. And I personally feel like because I don't have a unified worldview, I do not have authority to speak about people that, these millions of people that are losing their lives every single day. And I think that's maybe why I'm so passionate, but that's why I pour so much passion into talking about topics that I know so well, maybe because they're slightly lighter in value. Like, it's much easier for me to talk about a time that a man did me wrong than, tens of thousands of people being referred to as aliens in their own country. It's so much easier to talk about things that don't really matter, like trivial issues, than come online and talk about things like that. Because although I think my views are very clear, I do not stand with Trump. I think he's an abhorrent man, and I think his nothing. I have nothing polite to say, but again, it kind of goes back to that point of who the fuck am I to preach to the choir? Do you know what I mean? Like, all the information I get, I'm sure a lot of other people are getting as well. And, you know, I can repost things, I can share things, I can whatever. But to come online and try and speak so freely, I guess maybe, you know, there's a level of naivety that comes to it as well. When I started doing this when I was 19, and I'm 24 next week. So that's 5 years. And I think, you know, I was a lot more naive. I knew a lot less about what was going on in the world. And I also feel like things were calmer then, you know. We weren't, like, consistently on the edge of a world war. You know, I feel like things have become a lot more unstable since then. And it's a really fine line to walk between, do you use your corner of the internet as a way to find some kind of escapism, talk about things that kind of don't really matter that much, use your voice to spread awareness, because, like, I've always... I do not sit on the fence about anything. That's one thing I really, really try to pride myself on, is not sitting on the fence. Like, in any regard, I would rather you know my opinion and not like me for my opinion than try and appease two people who hold differing views, you know? And I think, you know, back to, I think it was maybe the second point I made about how I guess we feel that in this world where media is so prevalent and everyone has something to say, why is my voice worth listening to over anyone else's? People who are so much more educated on subject matters than me, people who have so much more to say about things, people who, you know, have platforms much bigger than mine and a much deeper and more complex understanding of what is going on. Why would you bother listening to me? Do you know what I mean? And I think that's why maybe I'm so much more selective about what I say or how I say it or whatever, because I think, and I think this is something that we all experience, and I particularly women, I think, experience this a lot more than men. I feel like men kind of just say whatever they want and get away with it for the most part. You know, it's that whole taking up space thing. Like, why should I take up space? Especially when you receive shit online about the things you say. It makes it even more difficult, because it's like, okay, well, I know people don't like what I do, or some people don't like what I do. And then I look at, like, controversial figures online that, you know, really make themselves into something and things like that. And I just think, like, I think I'm just trying to get back to a place of, or I don't think it's even about getting back to a place of, I think it's about finding this new balance between this fucking absolute, like, nutcase, whimsy, spiritually psychosis-induced teenager that I was at one point, and this, like, politically aware. I'm not depressed by any stretch, but, like, it is depressing watching the news. So this, like, politically aware, depressed overly observant adult, you know? They are so contradictory, and like, I am not depressed. I just I couldn't think of a better way to say that, and I'm not trying to use the depressed card as a way to gain sympathy points. I'm absolutely not, because I can already see it now, you know? But it's more, to me, this feeling of like, how do they both coexist? Like, how do you go about your day, la 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 la, knowing what is going on in the world, you know? And then not only that, try and fucking make some kind of presence for yourself, like make your own corner of the internet for yourself. And this goes for anyone that's trying to, you know, you might paint, you might try and be an influencer, you might try and do anything. You like, it's how do you do that? How do you do any of this? And actually, I read this really good article on Substack today, and it was talking about the title of it was something like, I didn't read the chapter in school about what mothers did in World War II when they still needed to cook and clean and provide for their families, you know? Like, that chapter was missing, and it was talking about how, you know, history is never written by the everyday person. History is never written by the side that lost. History is never written by the, I guess, like, proletariat, if you want to call it that. If you don't know what the proletariat is, it's basically like the everyday person, the working man. History is written by the winners and by the rich and by whoever controls the narrative at that point. So, you know, if you look back in history, it was the church, and kind of moving into the First and Second World War, it kind of became more of a business scheme, you know? And I don't know what the history books will look like in 20 years, 40 years, 100 years, whatever. But I feel like there will be... It's weird because obviously this is the first generation where the people have such a voice, and I think obviously that's what they don't like, because I've heard in America that there is a lot of what would the word be? Moderation. Like, there's heavy moderation on how what media they can see and what they can consume. So it's already kind of, you know, there's already this like erasure of personal experience, which, like, I understand it from their perspective, because they're trying to push these certain narratives, or these harmful narratives, to, I guess, like, divide and conquer and separate the people. Because I think, you know, inherently these people in power know that unity is the answer. It's always going to be the answer. But yeah, this Substack article was just talking about how there's never a voice for the like the housewife. And I feel like I'm not trying to come out here and be like, I'm trying to be the voice for the people, because that's not my intention in the slightest. I do not want that. But I feel like if more people just spoke about their day-to-day or how they were feeling online, even if it's like kind of cringe and like a bit awkward, and I don't know, sometimes I listen to myself back and I think like, oh my god, I actually hate you so much, like, you are so embarrassing. But then I think, oh, it is honest, you know? And it is the truth. And I feel like maybe in like 15 years or 20 years, I can listen to this back and be like, oh, that was before we went into war. And I was so happy. I don't know. I just think we should be, even though there is so much noise, there is so much media noise, and there is so much censoring of our word, and, you know, this whole thing of like women being silent and women not going out and women not speaking up, and, you know, just fucking talk, like, let's just talk about it. Like, let's all start a podcast. I don't know, like, I say this all the time, like, when people don't like, if people don't like what I say sometimes, just like, start your own podcast then. Like, I will listen to it. Like, I don't have to agree with you. I don't have to, you know, but just speak your mind, because I feel like so many people, all they consume is the minds of others. And I think that's one thing that's really helped me keep so solid in like my views, is that I basically just talk about my own philosophy all the time. Like, for the last hour, pretty much, I've just spoken about myself and my philosophy, which is inherently very, very egoic. But I think if you don't give space to yourself, sorry, I'm just like holding space, that makes me cringe, but if you don't give space to yourself to speak about yourself, and I know there are going to be people that are just be like, well, put it in a fucking journal, do you know what I mean? And that is so true, but I feel like it's nice to have a record of, you know, I don't know. I think my brain's kind of turning off now, but that was a real think piece right there. But yeah, I would just like to say, lastly, to anyone that's listening to this, if there is anyone listening to this that is currently in any kind of political unrest anywhere in the world, I'm so sorry, and I don't know how to help or what to do to help, but you can comment. So if you can comment like anywhere to donate or anything like that, anything that can be done apart from signing petitions and donating on, you know, the government websites, please do. Because I think it's just really hard being like, you know, I think everyone feels like this. It's like, well, I'm just one person, you know, and it's just so tough being, it's not like I'm trying to be like, it's so hard to talk about these things. It's like, it's not like I'm trying to be like, like pity and sympathy and sadness, but it's like, I do genuinely feel like what we are experiencing globally right now is the realist version of conflict we have seen. I think consistently throughout history before, we have received a very sanitized, watered down version of what oppression looks like. And now that we are like living through it, I think it's not only making us realize how much we were lied to, but also the extent to how bad things really were and still are. You know, I saw this post on TikTok about how slavery never went away, they just put on a red hat, you know, and it's so apparent. So yeah, please comment any links that you have if you know of anything that can be of help. I will do my best to like put all the links everywhere I can. But yeah, I'm gonna go. Sorry, I didn't expect for that to turn so political. It just kind of happened. But yeah, thank you guys for listening, and I hope you're okay, everyone, and I hope everyone is having a good New Year. Good night.